Hello, fellow Space Marines and Space Ninjas. Today, we're asking a question. Why did Warframe sail and Planetside fail? And I think the first thing that people are going to think is, but Sirius, one's a third person,
Hey everyone. All right. So Let's go ahead and get this started. So, on December 15th, the FCC is going to go ahead and hold their little internal vote on net neutrality. Now, some people don't know what net neutrality is. Basically, what it is it's saying that ISPs can't sit there and throttle individual users or content producers, uh, or web domains, whatever, just because they say so. They're not. They're also not allowed to charge individual domains for them to host. They also can't sit there and say, charge you extra so you can go ahead and access something like, let's say, YouTube. It makes it so they provide the service. It's a flat service, and they're not allowed to throttle specific sites or anything like that. Well, the SEC is trying to get rid of that. They're trying to make it so that they can go ahead and do this. And that's not all right. Not in any way, shape, or form. But the implications of this are pretty staggering. Because it's not only going to affect sites like YouTube, but it's also going to affect sites that could have potentially popped up, or services on phones, like Gab. Verizon can sit there and say, yeah, we're not allowing this to be transmitted over our network. Same thing with Charter or AT&T, whatever, whatnot. They are going to be able to say, you are not allowed to access this information through our service. Or they're going to be able to say, if you want access to this information, you have to pay us whatever the fuck we want to charge you for access to those services. And we can still throttle it at any point. Also, it allows them to sit there and say, oh, well, you're utilizing, and legally do this, by the way. There was a big kerfluffle about it before, but I'll get into it. But they could sit there and say, oh, well, you're using too much data, so we're going to go ahead and throttle your connection. So someone like me that streams, I use a fair amount of data by way of streaming. They're able to sit there and say, oh, yeah, if you want to continue doing that, if you want us to not throttle you, you have to pay us even more. And this is going to have kind of disastrous results for the internet as a whole. Because, for one, it is opening us up to corporate censorship. That means, these ISPs, if someone sits there and puts out an article, let's say, on corruption in internet service providers, they're able to sit there and throttle access to that article, make it impossible for you to go ahead and do it, for you to view that information. That's a problem. So, how do we combat that? Well, the long and the short of it is you really can't. Once this happens, and something's telling me that it's going to happen, basically the internet isn't going to be an exchange of free ideas anymore. It's basically going to be, don't say something that pisses off the internet service providers or their constituents. So that means if let's say if AT&T, let's say if the head of AT&T all of a sudden decides to go full SJW tard, they can go ahead and legally have their company throttle access to any conservative news sites. to any new websites, or even straight up block it. So they could sit there and say, "Oh, well, you know what? You're not allowed. If you're on our service, you're not allowed to visit Fox News, or you're not allowed to watch whatever conservative show you want. You're not allowed to do this. You're not allowed to post that. We can throttle you if you do this. We can charge you extra if you want to do that." So that's a problem for the consumer, because it's going to be limiting information that we get and have access to. It's also going to make it so that, let's say someone wanted to start up a MGTOW website. Well, if it's a feminist in charge of an ISP, or if the person in charge of the ISP is bending a knee to social justice warriors or to feminists, that means they're going to block that site. If you are on that service, that site will not be loadable to you. Everyone keeps saying, "Oh, well, if you have such an issue with YouTube, why don't you go ahead and create your own thing?" Well, people heard people saying that, and now the FCC is moving to make that an impossibility. This is literally taking away the option for people to get away from these larger sites. They're going to have to operate inside of these larger sites, and all these sites have to do is ban them. And that will effectively silence people. They will not be able to get that information out there reliably. And we've already seen that there's a lot of ISPs that are buying into the social justice bullshit. So at this point, for conservatives to be able to continue to speak somewhat freely, here's what's going to need to happen. There's going to have to be a conservative-friendly ISP. And if all the current ISPs decide to fight against conservatives and decide to censor us, then our only option is to start up an internet service provider service. So now that's going to be a problem in and of itself, because that's very, very costly. Starting up an ISP is billions of dollars, if not trillions. Then they're also going to have to go through and market. They're going to have to go through and get people to leave their current ISPs, but these people aren't going to know what's going on with these current ISPs. They're not. And so the thing, and they're supposed to have this transparency bullshit into some new regulations, but the thing is we've seen how well the government deals with transparency. They're perfectly fine with you hiding shit. They only have a problem with it if you get caught doing it by the general public, not by them. They'll sit there and know that this is happening. So, what are the options? Well, like I said, start up our own service providers, which is a very costly thing. I don't know of too many people that would be capable of doing this. And then at the same time, if you do that, then there's going to be people that are overzealous and want to kind of revenge censor. And that's a problem in and of itself, and I'll address that in another live stream or in a video. But, so they're making the barrier to entry to actually utilize your free speech on the internet so incredibly high. Or should I say potentially? Because there's no guarantee that all the major internet service providers are going to be going against conservatives. But something tells me that's pretty much how it's going to go down. Now, when it comes down to net neutrality, net neutrality was the only thing that is from the Obama era that I think needs to be preserved. To be perfectly honest, at least the only thing I can think of. Because net neutrality made it to where people could go out, they could use their voice, they could say what they wanted without worry of their website being shut down because of lack of access from internet service providers. If people wanted to fund them, they could go ahead and do it. Well, that's not going to be the case anymore. And this is going to make people be very dishonest when it comes to internet service providers, because they're not going to want to say something that's going to harm these internet service providers. Because the thing is like, let's say me, if I was to sit there and call out Comcast on being a piece of shit company, then the next time I go ahead to go to stream, all of a sudden I'm throttled. They don't have to give a reason. They can just do it. They can sit there and say that I'm spreading extremist propaganda and that they don't support that, so they're blocking me. But they're still taking the payments. That means that companies like Google can sit there and go through your emails, and if you're sending things that they don't like, they can go ahead and make it so you're not able to receive emails or send emails anymore. Which they could before by just canceling your account, but now they can do it openly. This opens the floodgate for the censorship of ideas, and it's exceedingly dangerous. I've left in the link a link to a website that you can go ahead and contact your politicians on it and tell them where they can fucking shove it. Hey, Black Sand, how's it going? So I recommend you go in there and you actually let them know that you're not for this. Because quite frankly, at this point, I think that this is the biggest blunder that Trump has ever made, was appointing this piece of shit head to the FCC. Now, I back a lot of the things that the president does, at least President Trump. But this is one of those things where I think he needs to come out and say, hey, this was a mistake, and put a stop to it. And if the FCC votes on this, then the Supreme Court needs to actually step in and say, no, you're not allowed to censor based on ideas or off of political standing. Because the thing is ISPs can then go ahead and say, oh, well, you know, the Southern Poverty Law Center says that these are all hate groups, and so that means we don't want them on our, we don't want their information coming through on our servers. So that means they're able to shut down pretty much any website. And if you think that these companies aren't in bed with places like the Southern Poverty Law Center, the Anti-Defamation League, all of these different groups, you got another thing coming. There's absolutely no way that this is going to end well. And this is actually paving the way for a totalitarian state. This is how it starts, is by the restriction of information, by the restriction of freedom of speech, by the restriction of freedom of expression. Take a look at China. Take a look at how they treat the internet. If you think that that same exact thing isn't going to happen just on a corporate level here, then you need to pull your head out of the sand. And you need to pull your head out of your ass. This is something that needs to be fought. Because this means that these companies will be able to threaten companies like YouTube and say, hey, if you don't get rid of these people, if we see any videos you know, espousing these ideas, we'll go ahead and block you. And no one will be able to access your services in the US. Which will then lead to YouTube going, oh, well, our hands are tied, even though they're sitting there and rubbing their hands together, going, finally, we have an excuse to openly do this. We don't have to try to be underhanded about it anymore. We don't have to try to finagle our way through it. And I know that this sounds like me coming off as alarmist. But the thing is I am raising an alarm. I'll openly admit that. The reason why I'm so alarmed by it is because if we don't do something about this now, there is no real turning back. Because if you think that these corporations are going to be willing to give up that much power, then you haven't been paying attention to history. Honestly, this was one of the one things our government's done right. And now they're going to reverse it. If this goes through, this will be basically the end of a lot of MGTOW channels on YouTube. It's going to be the end of a lot of websites that actually give the conservative side. It's going to be the end of pretty much every website that actually reports the truth. You're going to see sites like 4chan and Reddit and all of that end up starting to get blocked until they get rid of any of the political shit. Well, 4chan, they're just going to outright block. They're going to outright ban that by just denying service. By them removing net neutrality, they are allowing for a heckler's veto to affect the entirety of the internet. I wish there was something positive I could say about this, but I don't see anything positive. Not unless pretty much everyone in the US writes in and says, look, you go ahead and do this. We're going to vote all of you out. Everyone involved in this is going to be gone next term. And we're going to get someone in that can come in and correct it. That's not going to be afraid to stand up to these companies and tell them to go fuck themselves. Because this is going to drive up the cost of the internet for everyone. It's going to limit the information that you're able to access on the internet. And it's going to do all of this based off of the whims and beliefs of a few corporate fat cats in charge of the major ISPs. There is no good way to look at this. This is all negative. And it sucks. I always try to find at least something funny about it or some positive way that it can turn out, even by the farthest stretch of the imagination. There is none here. Because we have seen corporation after corporation after corporation get invaded by SJWs because the SJWs invaded the government, and they pass laws saying, hey, you have to hire SJWs into your fucking companies and put them in positions that can cripple the company unless you appease them. You thought the Trust and Safety Councils being involved with Twitter and with YouTube were bad? Just imagine when they get a hold of the reins of your service provider. You thought it was bad before. You haven't seen anything yet. Right now, it feels like we're only pushing forward the worst possible ideas. You're right, Black Sand. Freedom of speech will be gone. Because the only way that you're going to be able to the only way that you're going to be able to express yourself freely is by standing on a soapbox with a megaphone and shouting at random people walking down the street. But then the police can come in, arrest you, beat you to death, and then the ISPs can keep the information from being spread around. What's the first thing you try to do in war? Cut their communications. That's what this is going to be doing. And if people think that this is the government giving up power, no, it's not. Because the thing is, the government goes ahead, gives this capability to the ISPs. What happens when we get the next Obama administration in? I'm curious. What happens when we get the next Obama administration in? Because we will have that. Thing is this is going to be basically guaranteeing Hillary a win. Because if it wasn't for net neutrality, we would not have known any of the information. We wouldn't have been able to access WikiLeaks. We wouldn't have been able to access the Project Veritas videos. None of that information would have been out there. This right here is setting us up to become a dictatorship. This is actually dangerous for our country, especially right now. The fact that Trump let this happen on his watch, he might end up being credited in the future with the downfall of the US by this horrendous mistake that he is unwilling to admit is a mistake and that he is unwilling to correct. He fired James Comey. Why won't he fire this piece of shit as soon as he fucking started making noises in this direction? But this right here will destroy us as a country. Yes, it is of that importance. And quite frankly, at this point, I want out. This is the first time in my life where I've actually started looking at how I could possibly move out of this country. And for anyone who doesn't understand what I was talking about with the what happens when we get the next Obama administration in, I'm talking about the IRS going after conservatives. So let's say by some magic that one of these companies decides to not block conservative sites. Next Obama administration comes in, the IRS goes ahead and audits the living fuck out of that ISP until that ISP goes out of business from the cost of having to go through audit after audit after audit. They've done it before. I guarantee you they'll do it again because they were completely unremorseful about it. The fact that we're even having to have this discussion pisses me off beyond no end. And Turbattle, yes, you're right. The thing is the only ones at this point that will be able to block this is the Supreme Court, but something tells me the Supreme Court isn't going to step in. Trump could also stop this by going ahead and firing this piece of shit. He needed to fire him as soon as he even sat there and said, "Oh, I want to go ahead and get rid of it." No. Trump needed to fire him that very same day. That motherfucker deserved his walking papers. Well, Turbattle, the thing is with net neutrality in place, at the very least, we had a fighting chance. Whereas with no net neutrality, we're going to be in a censorship state. We are slowly but surely turning into a police state at this point. It's going to be to a point where you are going to have to pay an absurd amount of money to use your freedom of speech on the internet. And then it's going to cost people an absurd amount of money to be able to access it. Because what they're doing right now is they are making censorship profitable. Period. End of story. They are actually making censorship into a business. And the thing is no one's going to be able to speak out about it. And the thing is these ISPs are all in bed with these legacy media companies. So what do you think they're going to do? They're going to shut down everything but the legacy media companies' websites. They're going to have full access to those. But if you want access to alternative media sites, oh, you have to buy this package. Oh, you have to buy that package. Oh, you have to buy this package. Remember, these ISPs are also cable companies. Oh, Turbattle, that's not crazy at all. Because the thing is it is liberals that have moved us in this direction. This is how the U.S. falls. Not with a bang. Not with a mighty last cry. But with a gagged whimper. $200 of hard work. Down the tubes. With a single vote. I'm going to end this stream here because I'm starting to get really fucking pissed off and I'm starting to get really fucking depressed about this shit. I never thought I'd actually see the day that the US would actually become completely and totally gripped by censorship. Never thought I'd see it. Not in my lifetime, anyway. But that's what we're going to get. Because the thing is, the only way to fight against this would be for everyone that actually cares about this the next time around to sit there and ask the hardball question, are you going to reinstate net neutrality? And anyone that answers no, vote for anyone but them. And we're going to have people that are going to be brave enough to come out and run on the premise of reinstating net neutrality. Which I'm sure there will be a few. But I doubt that there will be enough. And the thing is those people, we won't be able to find out what happens to them. Because I guarantee you they'll come out, they'll say it, and then all of a sudden they'll magically drop out of the race, and all of a sudden no one can get a hold of them anymore. No one knows where they went. It's kind of funny. I actually have to quote one thing from the Washington Post. Democracy dies in darkness. Well, guess what? We're going into that darkness right now, ripe for the slaughter. So I wish everyone the best. Anyone that lives in a country that is still actually fucking free, I'm jealous. and I don't know how much longer you guys are going to be able to hear from me. So, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to end it here. Have yourselves a good one. As good as it can be. Hopefully I'll be able to talk to y'all later.